Hi there, my name is Gavin Spores. I'm a Nico Outreach Officer at Norwich University of the Arts. I'm also a film and moving image production graduate from there too. And today we're going to be looking at the first of three workshops revolving around documentary filmmaking. Throughout the whole time that schools and colleges are closed, we at Nico and Norwich University of the Arts are going to be releasing a whole host of workshops from film to illustration to fine arts, and we're going to be releasing those online. So do keep an eye out on any other workshops that we'll be delivering. But for now, let's dive straight into the documentary workshop all around finding your story. So, storytelling is a huge part of many different creative art outlets, be it illustration, fine art, animation, film. A lot of the time, the artists in those fields are trying to tell a story through their craft. Even though a lot of people are struggling, there is this power that we can tell a story around the same subject, but from many different angles, since each of us have a completely different background and our own little spin within a shared event that's happening. So, throughout the workshop today, we're going to be covering a few things. So, first of all, we're going to be looking at the opportunities that are available in the UK film industry, and then we're going to swiftly move on to what a documentary is, which I guarantee that most of you have seen a documentary in your time. But then we're also going to look at how we can plan a documentary, which from there we can take into filming and editing your own documentary. So the UK film industry is a lot bigger than you probably think. I mean, back in 2017, the film industry had a turnover of £14.8 billion. And in 2018, there were 15,595 companies. So imagine out with all of that money and with all of those companies, you can only imagine how much jobs are out there and the opportunities that there are out there for you. And those kind of opportunities can come in many forms. So there are a whole host of different jobs out there just in film and moving image alone. So everything ranging from being a sound designer to an art director to being a camera operator. And you've got things like being an editor and a colorist. There's a whole host of different jobs. I mean, if we look at this image up top there, so that is director Amira Asante, who was working on her feature film Bella. And within that image alone, you can see so many different roles being utilised right there. So she being the director is directing a cast right there. But if you look at the costumes, that's a costume designer that have designed those outfits. And then you've got wardrobe assistants who are fitting those outfits onto the cast members. And then if we look in the background there, we've got looks like a dolly and track near their feet behind there. So you got to have somebody who's operating that piece of equipment, and then we've got the camera crews operating the cameras on there, and you can see a whole host of people behind them. Film productions are usually quite big because there are so many roles and so many jobs on hand, just to make a film. But obviously, within film and moving image, you've got animation as well, which you got some roles that cross over each other. You're still going to have an art director. You got producers and directors, but there's a lot more. There's a variety of roles that utilizes more drawing skills and more sort of pen and paper art going on there. But also with technology, a lot of 3D work, which then leads into visual effects, which is huge in the film industry now. And that is a lot more technical, but it still has a lot of roles available. And this is just all in the world of film and moving image. So there's a lot out there for you to dive in. And if we just look here, this is a perfect example of the variety of roles. And you got things that you might already know and be aware of, like producing and directing, a screenwriter who writes the story and the script, and you got camera operators and whatnot. But there's, even though a lot of that may come from film and moving image backgrounds at university and higher education, yeah, there's also different backgrounds that come into play within film. So, for example, if we look at the technical bubble there, we've got gaffers who essentially work with lights and lighting a set, and a lot of their backgrounds are going to be electricians who fill those roles. So, film and moving image employs so many different skills. But without further ado, we'll go and head straight into documentary filmmaking today. So, what is a documentary? So, using a good Oxford Dictionary definitions, we got that a documentary is using pictures or interviews with people involved in real events, or a film and television program that provides a real life report on a particular subject. And like I said before, I guarantee you have seen a documentary before. It could be something like For Sama, which was produced by Channel 4, which is a feature-length documentary film, or what everybody's been watching, Tiger King, released on Netflix, a whole series around one particular real-life event. And we've got nature documentaries, which are hugely popular, like Planet Earth 2. So when it comes to actually coming up with producing your own documentary, it can be quite tricky or finding a place to start. And it's exactly the same as if you were making a fiction film as well. But I always think the best place to start, especially when it comes to documentary, is picking a subject. Now, these can be things from climate crisis to civil rights to politics to religion, and these are usually quite popular topics that documentary filmmakers usually explore. But you can even go into more niche areas. So if we look at, this is Heart of Darkness, which is a documentary about the behind the scenes of Apocalypse Now, which is, I would argue, even more interesting than the film itself, because the production was an absolute nightmare and there's so many fascinating things going on. And then you got things like Free Solo, which is about free solo climbing, where you're climbing these impossible cliff faces without any safety equipment. And it's an unbearable watch, but it's really fascinating. And then you got things like Amy, which is about Amy Winehouse, but the subject around musicians and stardom. So, but the main important thing is picking a subject that is close to you. Does it excite you? It could be a subject that frustrates you or angers you, and you want to show the world that, or a subject that intrigues you. Pick something that you have some personal connection to. And once you've decided your subject, we need to narrow that down. Because if you're doing a documentary that covers civil rights, you're not going to be able to cover every single aspect of civil rights within an hour and a half or even, a series, because that subject is ginormous. It's impossible to cover every single aspect. So we need to narrow your subject down. And there's two kind of ways to go about that. There's one way to go about that, which is finding the most interesting story within the subject. So if we look at For Sama, so the subject being the siege of Aleppo, which is it's quite narrowed down in a sense, but the actual story that we're seeing is about a couple who run a hospital within the siege of Aleppo, and they're raising a daughter within this war zone. So that's that specific story within the subject. Or we got things like Tiger King, where the subject is about the big cat crisis in America, but the specific story being told to explore that subject is about this crazy character, Joe Exotic, and his tiger sanctuary that he has. So you need to find what your particular story is, and what will help push that is what is the theme that you want to explore within the documentary and within that subject that you are exploring. So from there, we can start looking at how to plan your documentary. Once you've figured out what your subject is and you've narrowed it down to a specific story you want to tell, we need to go about, okay, how do we plan that? How do we research that? And the first research tip I'm going to give you is Go watch some documentaries. There are so many out there. So these are just three personal picks that I have. So Grizzly Man is a really good place to start. So it's directed and produced by a famous documentary filmmaker called Werner Herzog, and he gets a little bit unorthodox with his documentary filmmaking because he actually gets involved in the story a little bit himself. But overall, it's just a really well made documentary, and you can't go wrong with watching some Werner Herzog documentaries. He is an absolute master at telling these really small stories that tell and cover a huge subject. And then we've got Louis Theroux, which a lot of you might be familiar with already. And his Weird Weekend series is a good place to go because you can pick the subjects that you're into, or it could be, you find a subject like Louis Theroux is covering that might be similar to what you want to explore. And then lastly, The Act of Killing, which is the most unorthodox documentary, but it's an absolutely fascinating watch. Definitely recommend that. So once you've got familiar with watching a few documentaries, then you get a sense of what works and what doesn't work. We can start to think about how you're going to research your subject in your story. So there's nothing wrong with starting off with a good Google search, and just finding, you might end up on Wikipedia or kind of generic information sites, but it's a really good place to start. And then from there, you can branch off and really dive deep into your subject and story. So from there, you can look out different books. It might be from your local library, or you can order online, be an ebook. There's different films. I mean, it could be a documentary that explores a similar subject area, or it could be, a fictional film that depicts a real life event that's close to the story that you want to, or, articles are a really good place, news sources, because obviously news outlets are depicting real life events, which is what you're going to be doing in your documentary. So news articles, it could be journals, they have some really good sources, and that could all be found within some Google settings as well. I definitely recommend watching interviews with documentary filmmakers as well, so you can see their approach when they go ahead and start making another documentary, and that might help with your research and your planning as well. But there's something really important to think about, which is about contrasting opinions and viewpoints. So we've got here Michael Moore, he's a fantastic documentary filmmaker, and they all revolve around politics in America, and he is unapologetically one-sided, which they still makes it for fascinating watches, but really when it comes to documentary filmmaking, you want to see both sides of a subject, or both sides. If there's conflicts or issues, you want to see both sides, because it just adds that extra layer of depth to the story that you're telling, and it really helps make your audience think about your subject and make they start to form their own opinion on the story that you've presented them. But what you want to do after your research is just keep going until you feel confident enough that you've got enough research to turn into your story. So from there, if you've got enough research and you've got a particular story that you want to tell within the broad subjects that you want to explore, we can start to produce a treatment. So really what makes up a treatment, it's very similar to fiction filmmaking as well. So you'll want to start by summarizing the story in a couple sentences, almost like a synopsis or like a pitch. And from there, that's when the meat of it happens, where you need to outline a story you wish to capture on camera. Now I'll get there in a minute on why I say what you wish to capture on camera. But this will probably be about half a page long, where you want to outline the story, what you kind of want the structure of your story to be. And it's always good to cap it off by highlighting how all of the above fits into the theme and subject area you want to explore. So everything comes full circle at the end of your document. And from there, you should be ready to head straight into production. Now, when I say about outlining a story that you wish to capture on camera, obviously the nature of a documentary, since you're recording a real life event unfolding, you can't predict exactly what's going to happen. Unlike a fiction film where you've written, a story, beginning, middle, end, and because it's your story, you've written it, you can command and dictate exactly how that story unfolds. With real life events, you can't do that. You can't predict what's going to happen. None of us know what's going to happen at the end of lockdown or when lockdown is going to, fully lift. So if we look at For Sama, at the start of the film, the filmmaker, she was just recording. It was. The different riots and protests that students were doing in the city, and before she knew it, the siege happened, and obviously she could not predict this happening. And then, especially when the whole theme of the story with her daughter being born, she couldn't predict that she'd become pregnant within that time during the siege. And then if we look at Tiger King, so these are the filmmakers and the directors of Tiger King. And at the start, they were in America videoing and recording events around exotic snakes. And it was only until they met someone who opened a van and there was a snow leopard in the back of a redneck's van, that's when the story switched gear. And then they made a whole documentary about the big cat crisis. So even these documentary filmmakers could not predict in their wildest dreams exactly what path they were going to be on and their overall story that they had at the end of production and post-production. And the same with you. So you can prepare it's just about being prepared as much as you can, but always having on the back of your head, no matter what twists and turns happen ahead during production, is relating everything back to the theme and the overall message that you want to explore and get across. So the task I have for you with all this information in mind is I want you to produce a treatment for a 3-minute documentary. Now your subject is going to be determined. It's going to be covering the coronavirus pandemic. But obviously the story that you tell within that could be anything. Just to clarify, what I wanted to see in that treatment is 2 sentences summarizing the story that you want to tell. Have half a page outlining the story of the direction that you think the story will go in and how you might want to see it, and then just at the end clarifying the themes. And it's just important to always refer to these questions. So what is the story and theme of your documentary? Do you have enough research to turn into a story? And from there you'll be able to produce your treatment. And then with our next session, we'll be looking at how to produce and how to shoot your documentary that you've got. So hopefully that's all been really helpful in how to tell the documentary, but go out there and find your story, have fun with it. And just to conclude, if you have any questions about anything that you've seen through this workshop, or you need us to clarify anything, do give us an email at art@takeyourplace.ac.uk. And if you do have any treatments or research that you do want to share, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, our handles are at the bottom there. So we would love to see your work. Thank you very much for joining today, and we'll see you next time in part 2, where we're going to look at capturing your story.